Hi, my dear students and my dear colleagues. In my previous video, towards the end, I was talking about how Cassius tries his best to instigate Brutus against Caesar. Here, Cassius compares the growing power of Caesar to this huge colossus. I've told you Colossus was a huge statue of Apollo which stood on the both sides of the harbor at a place called Rhodes in ancient Greece. And we don't know whether such a statue existed or not. But people talk about Colossus. That's why the word has come, the word colossal has come into being. Colossal means very big, very huge. Look at Cassius. He tells Brutus, "Why, man, he doth bestride this narrow world like a colossus." Rome becomes very narrow when Caesar grows high into being a dictator. So the world of Rome becomes very narrow for a dictator, because a dictator always looks down upon his country and his countrymen. This is power politics. I can give you various examples like, Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, and even Saddam Hussein. These dictators, how they, exploited their people. That's why here he says, "Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus." If he becomes huge like Colossus, a dictator, what would be our fate? Cassius says, all the other Romans would become petty men. Petty men are men who don't have any importance at all, who don't have any significance at all. They become insignificant, very small when Caesar grows into a dictator. And we petty men, see, Cassius says, if Caesar is given more importance by the people, and if Caesar's power is not limited, then he says he would bestride in future. He's talking about what would happen in future, Cassius. Let me tell you, friends, Caesar has not become the king right now. Caesar's supporters are planning to crown him as a king. And Cassius is misguiding Brutus to believe that Caesar would become a dictator if he is crowned a king. He says, "Why, man, he doth bestride this narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men, what would we do? We walk under his huge legs." Look at the word huge, very carefully used by Cassius. Caesar would become huge as a colossus if he becomes a dictator after becoming a king. And what would be the fate of the Romans like Cassius and Brutus and the rest? They would become petty men, and they would have to walk under his huge legs like petty men, like insignificant men, like ants, to peep about, to find ourselves dishonorable graves. To peep about, to find ourselves dishonorable graves. We will have to find some corner somehow to lead our life, insignificant life, in fear. And we will have to die some insignificant, meaningless death. That's what he means by that. Dishonorable graves means death which doesn't have any honor, A slave's death doesn't have any honor. So we will have to die as slaves when Caesar becomes a dictator. This is what Cassius is, trying to put across. Then he says, my dear friend, Brutus, men at some time are masters of their fate. My dear Brutus, let me tell you one thing. Men at some time are the masters of their fate. If we mind, we can change our fate. Cassius doesn't believe in the concept of fate controlling people's lives. Because Cassius is very practical. I've told you, Cassius is an Epicurean. The Greek philosopher Epicurus always questioned the superstitions and superstitious beliefs. He was very logical. And Cassius is a strong follower, a die-hard follower of Epicurus. That is why Cassius is an Epicurean who is very practical, who doesn't believe in the superstitious beliefs and this word called fate and fatalism. He doesn't believe in those things. That's why Cassius says, men at some time are masters of their fate. That means we still have the power to change our fate. We feel that we are fated to be Caesar's slaves in the near future and Caesar to be a dictator. We can change that if we mind. We can change that, he says. That's why he says, men at some time, when situation demands, men can change their fate. Men are sometimes masters of their fate. That's why he says, that is why the fault of allowing Caesar to be crowned a king and allowing Caesar to become a dictator, this fault is not in people's stars. Let not people believe that it is their fate to live the life of slaves and it is the fate of Caesar to become a dictator. No. Caesar is going to be crowned and is going to be a dictator because of people's faults. And the fault is, Cassius very cleverly puts it across. The fault, Cassius says, the fault is within the people. The fault is not in their stars, he says. Because we are underlings, we are subordinates. We feel that we cannot voice our feelings. We feel that we are subordinates to Caesar. Who is this Caesar? He is after all a Roman general. What is special about the word Caesar, the name Caesar? It is as ordinary as the name of Brutus and Cassius, that's all. The word, the name Caesar, doesn't have any special powers, But Caesar is given special powers by his supporters, which Cassius doesn't want it to be to take place, let me say. That's why Cassius says very cleverly, men at some time are masters of their fate. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings, he says. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars. It is not in our fate. Who said we are fated to live like slaves of Caesar? No. The fault is in ourselves, he says. The fault is in ourselves. Because we are keeping our mouth shut. We have already started behaving like Caesar's slaves. Even before Caesar could become a king and a dictator. This is very tragic, man, Cassius says. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Because we are the underlings. We don't have any significance. We have allowed ourselves to be ruled by Caesar. Then he talks about the two names, the proper nouns, Brutus and Caesar. And then he says, Caesar has eaten the same food as Brutus has eaten, as Cassius has eaten. Caesar is not a god to drink nectar, which is supposed to be the drink of the gods. He is a very ordinary human being. The only difference is that he is our Roman general. That's all. That's the only difference. He says, Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that Caesar? And why should that name be sounded more than yours, more than mine, he says. Here I would like to talk about another play of, William Shakespeare called Romeo and Juliet. And even there, Juliet asks this rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is a question which has an answer in itself. Juliet, look at it. Juliet says, what is in a name? This is what Juliet says in another play of Shakespeare called Romeo and Juliet. Juliet says, what is in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Look at this. What is in the name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. The flower which we call a rose, even if you call a rose by some other name, it would still smell as sweet. That's why in Hindi we say, Naam mein kya rakha hai? What is there in the name? You got my point difference? Here Cassius says, Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Why should people take out the name of Caesar more than Brutus? Because even Brutus has the same significance as Caesar has in the minds of the people of Rome. In another scene, Casca gives a fitting tribute to Brutus. Casca says, in the next scene, he says, oh, Brutus sits high in all people's hearts. Look at this. Brutus sits high in all people's hearts. What does this mean? This means that even Brutus has as much importance as Caesar has. Then here, what Cassius' argument is, why should Caesar's name be sounded more than Brutus's name? Because both the names have the same spelling. Have the same letters, same number of letters, let me tell you. I'm sorry, not the same spelling, the same number of letters. Brutus, B-R-U-T-U-S. The name Brutus has six letters, and even the name Cassius has 6 letters. They are as common as anybody's name. And look at Cassius's point of view. He is here, making Brutus feel jealous of Caesar's popularity. That's why he's flattering Brutus into going against, Caesar. He says, why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. You write the name of Caesar, write the name of Brutus together. Yours is as beautiful a name as Caesar's is. Both names are beautiful. Both names are fair. Weigh them, it is as heavy. Weigh them. The name Caesar has 6 letters and the name Brutus also has 6 letters. Weigh them, they are equally heavy. Then, in the name of God, why should Caesar's name be sounded more than yours, is Cassius's argument. Now Cassius says, now in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat doth this our Caesar feed that is grown so great, he says. I'm taking out all the names of gods and I'm asking a question to all these gods. What's the question? He says, upon what meat doth this our great Caesar feed? What is the food eaten by Caesar? Has he eaten, or is he eating God's food? No, he is eating the same food as you and I am eating. Upon what meat? Meat in the sense of food, Don't mistake meat for something non-vegetarian here, my dear friends. He says, now in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat doth this our Caesar, look, our Caesar is very ironical. This our Caesar feed that he's grown so great. He is made great. He has not become great is what Cassius's argument is. Then he talks about the age in which these people are living, the age in which Caesar is living, Brutus is living, Cassius is living. He says, age, thou art ashamed. Age, you don't have any shame. Rome, and he now comes to his country, Rome. He says, Rome, thou hast lost the breed of noble men or noble bloods. Oh, my dear Rome, you have lost the breed of noble bloods. The breed is people. You have lost the people of noble blood. He's talking about how their ancestors were. Romans now have thews and limbs like to their ancestors. Romans now have thews or muscles. Romans now are as strong as their ancestors. But, he says, their fathers' minds are dead. It is very tragic that our fathers' minds are dead. And we are governed only with our mother's spirits. Then he goes on to say in the next scene to Cassius, this yoke and sufferance prove that we are womanish, he says. We are not manly, we are womanly, we are womanish, he says. Romans, at present the Romans have strong muscles and strong limbs as their ancestors had. Physically, Cassius says Romans are very strong, but mentally they don't have their fathers' minds. What is the meaning of fathers' minds? To rebel against inequality. To rebel against bad things. That courage, that boldness, that is the father's mind. He says our fathers' minds are dead because we are keeping quiet. We are allowing a weak Caesar to grow like a dictator, like a Colossus. Is it not our fault? Is what Cassius wants to, prove his point of view. That's why he says, our father's spirits are dead and we are governed with our mother's spirits. Our father's minds are dead. We are no more, we don't have strong minds because our minds are being controlled by our mothers. The spirits of our mothers are controlling our mind because a mother is very, submissive, very silent and very what shall I say, very obliging, whereas the father is very bold, very dominating, very courageous. He says, Cassius says, Rome, thou hast lost the breed of noble bloods. Oh, Rome, you have lost the breed of noble bloods. Then he talks about the great flood. He talks about the great flood. In Kannada we call it Pralaya. That great flood caused by the Greek god Zeus to destroy this sinful world. But he could save only a couple, a devoted, a God-fearing, a very sacred couple called Deucalion and Pyrrha. Deucalion is a man and Pyrrha is his wife. And these two people were saved. Only this couple could be saved by God Zeus. And the rest were completely destroyed in that great flood. And Cassius gives a reference to that great flood and says, when went by an age since the great flood? After the great flood, we have got many ages, and no age is dominated by one man. No age has been dominated by one man. But now the time has come for these Romans to be dominated by one man, that is Caesar, which they should not allow it to happen. This is what Cassius' argument is. Look at this. He says, when went there by an age since the great flood, but it was famed with more than with one man. You give me one example, my dear Brutus. Since the great flood, we have had many ages. Show me one age which was dominated by one man. But now the time has come for that one man, Caesar, to dominate our world, our Rome, he says. And he wants that to be avoided. Cassius talks about Brutus's ancestor. He says even Brutus had an ancestor called, I think I had already spoken about Brutus' ancestor in my previous videos. His ancestor was Lucius Junius Brutus, who founded the Roman Republican country, who founded the Republic of Rome way back in perhaps 509 BC. This Brutus's ancestor was that Lucius Junius Brutus. I told you he killed his own sons, 2 sons, for supporting the Tarquins, the dictators. That ancestor of this Brutus, Lucius Junius Brutus, was a great lover of democracy, democratic values. He was a great lover of republicanism. He was a great lover of freedom. He was a great lover of his country. Now he talks about Cassius. Cassius talks about Brutus's ancestor. He says, oh, you and I have heard our fathers say, my dear Brutus, you have heard, I have heard our ancestors talk about your ancestor. Oh, you and I have heard our fathers say, there was a Brutus once. There was a Brutus. He's talking about Lucius Junius Brutus. There was a Brutus once that would have brooked the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king. That Lucius Junius Brutus would have tolerated a devil to rule Rome instead of allowing a king to rule a Rome. That means rule their country, Rome. That means that Lucius Junius Brutus was as much against the devil as he was against One man ruling his country. So when that ancestor of this Brutus could prevent dictators from ruling the country, why couldn't you? Why shouldn't you? Is Cassius's argument. Okay. He says, oh, you and I have heard our fathers say, there was a Brutus once that would have brooked the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king. And his blood is running in your veins. And you should also help your country to free itself from one man's rule. That one man, Caesar, ruling their country, he says. Then Brutus says, okay. He says, but you do love me, I am not jealous. My dear Cassius, I know that you love me. Brutus says, I know that you have a lot of respect for me. That you do love me, I am not jealous. I am not doubtful about it. Here the word jealous gives us the meaning of being doubtful. And what you would work me to, I have some aim. What you want me to do, I have some aim. Brutus says, you want me to prevent Caesar from becoming a king and a dictator. I know, I could sense that, he says. And then he says, I shall recount hereafter for this, I shall think of these things hereafter. And for this present, I would not so with love, I might entreat you, be any further moved. Please don't move me any further. Don't make me emotional about my country. Don't you ever become emotional about your country. Right now, let us have a balanced mind. Let us depart and let us meet once again. Brutus says, if you want me to meet you, I will meet you. Or if you want to meet me, you can come to my house and meet me. My doors are always open to you. This is what Brutus says. Brutus says, what you have said, I will consider. On what you have to say, I will with patience hear. And then I will find a time both me to hear and answer such high things. These are high things, Saying in one's country, showing patriotism, stopping a person from becoming a king and a dictator. These are all high things. This is not the right time to discuss all these things. We will meet up again and we will find a better time to discuss all these things, he says. Then he says, till then, Brutus says, my noble friend. He's calling Cassius a noble friend, whereas Cassius is not noble. Till then, my noble friend, chew upon this. Think of this. Brutus had rather be a villager than to repute himself a son of Rome under these hard conditions as this time is likely to lay upon us. Look at this. Brutus says, oh my dear Cassius, Brutus would rather be a villager, would rather be an insignificant man, would rather be an unimportant man if he keeps quiet in spite of all these difficulties. I will not keep quiet. I am not going to keep quiet. I would rather give my life away for my people to save my countrymen from one man's rule, he says. Then Cassius, he pretends being very humble. Cassius says, I am glad that my weak words, he says, he has spoken weak words. My dear friends, has Cassius ever spoken weak words? He has spoken words of great importance. Look at this fellow. He is keeping a very low profile because he has to be like that before Brutus. Otherwise, Brutus would not join him in the conspiracy against Caesar. That's why look at Cassius's cunning nature. Brutus, I am glad that my weak words have struck but thus much show of fire from Brutus. I could strike some fire from Brutus. I am happy that my weak words have inflamed Brutus's love for his country. I am happy that my weak words have, encouraged you, have inspired you to think of your country and country's freedom. Look at Cassius. This is how he is flattering Brutus. At this time, at this moment, the holy chase and all the sports activities during this festival of Lupercalia come to an end, and now it is a play, and everything has to happen on the stage. And now we see, the audiences see Caesar and his followers enter the stage. So we will meet up next time in my next video. Until then, God bless you. Bye-bye.